Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start. So let's get this started. Welcome, everyone. This is the Introduction to Dæmonism panel. This panel will focus on describing the concept of Dæmonism, what they are, what the community surrounding them is, a little bit about form finding, and at the end of this panel, there will be time to discuss for some open discussion and questions. Just a reminder, this panel is being recorded. Now, before we get into talking about Dæmonism, a quick introduction about us. We are the House of Chimeras system. We are a large, mixed-origin, multiple system. Of everyone in our system, only a few of us have daemons, as only some of us have taken much of an active interest in the concept. We discovered the daemon community in 2008 through the Theron community and have been active since 2009. Although all of our alter-human projects we have created, only one of them really specifically pertains to Dæmonism, that being our document called A Timeline of the Dæmon Community. We've already forgetting our slides. There, we missed a slide. Darn. Before we get into things, a little bit about pronunciation explanation. This weird letter that combines an A and an E is called an ash. Technically speaking, the proper pronunciation of the word dæmon is pronounced the same as the word demon, D-E-M-O-N. However, it's fairly common in the daemon community for the word to instead be pronounced with a hard A sound rather than a hard E sound. It's pronounced, so it would be pronounced dæmon instead of as I am doing right now. The reason for this mostly stems from either two things. One, it's a means of creating a clear verbal distinction between daemon and demon, or some people just presumed that's how the word is pronounced because they weren't very familiar with the mechanics of the letter itself. We're of the latter camp. We didn't know that it was actually pronounced demon for a while. So it's just how we naturally say daemon. Either pronunciation is perfectly correct in the community as far as the community is concerned. Which is used is largely down to personal preference. We ourselves usually say daemon, though occasionally we'll slip and say demon. So if you hear us say either word, know that we're actually referring to the same thing, just a slightly different pronunciation. Actually, we need to go back because we're not done yet. Next, a little bit about the spelling. The word is technically spelled D-M-O-N. However, most keyboards don't naturally come with that letter in a quick and easily accessible reach. So it's pretty common for the word to be spelled as D-A-E-M-O-N instead of D-M-O-N in the community. Within the daemon community, both spellings are considered acceptable, just because it's hard to sometimes get to that very unusual letter on a keyboard. Now to start off with, what is Dæmonism and what are demons in a general sense? In the His Dark Materials series, a daemon is an external corporeal manifestation of a person's soul / inner self into the form of a non-human animal. In the series, although appearing as a separate entity with their own name and personality, a daemon is an integral part of a person with that daemon. During childhood, a person's daemon is a shapeshifter, but once a person reaches a certain stage in their life, their daemon settles into a specific form that symbolically represents the person's personality and nature. The general ideas created by Pullman for his series has since been used to inspire the concept called Dæmonism. Dæmonism refers to the practice of having and communicating with one's daemon. It is a concept formulated within the online community called the Dæmon community. What daemons are can generally be described as a mental construct that is directly connected to someone and acts in a manner similar to the demons in the series His Dark Materials. Similar to the fictional demons that are inspired the concept, daemons are assigned, or inside themselves, a name, gender, personality, and so on. The name of one's daemon can be practically anything. With some people, they take some inspiration from the naming conventions of the daemons within the His Dark Materials series, while others do not. For gender, in Philip Pullman's series, Daemons are almost always the opposite gender of their person in a very anima-esque young archetype way, but real-life daemons don't have to follow this strict restriction at all. Within Dæmonism, a person who has a daemon is called a dæmian, or sometimes the word is called demonian. I've never actually heard that used, but we have seen people say that that's another word. How people exactly view a daemon varies within the community. Some people consider their daemons to be just very elaborate imaginary friends. Some view them as part of the dæmian's mind, the parts of the mind that are basically the other half of the internal dialogue and thought processing that acts as in a counterpoint to one's own thoughts. That becomes the daemon. Others perceive daemons as being part of the dæmian's mind that has been given some amount of autonomy of their own, similar to a tulpa. Daemons can even hold more spiritual views regarding their daemons as being a representation of their soul or part of their soul. Regarding how a dæmian views their daemon's existence, regardless of how a dæmian views their daemon's existence, what a daemon can do or be for their dæmian in their daily life varies. Sometimes a daemon can act as a voice of reason. Other times, a devil's advocate, or sometimes just a friendly ear or voice for the dæmian. The dynamic between a daemon and their dæmian can be whatever is desired or just comes naturally. There is also no minimum amount of interaction required to be a dæmian. A dæmian can interact with their daemon all the time, or only occasionally, or sometimes just off and on for any length of time throughout, over the years. There are even people in the community that basically never interact with their demon and are only really interested in Dæmonism for the form-finding component of the concept. To interact with their demon, some dæmians do what is called projecting in the community. That is, imagining and visualizing their demon interacting with them in the external environment, as if they are physically present beside their dæmian. Projecting is easier for some people, but for others it is not. How vivid projecting can be also widely varies from person to person. Some people project their daemon a lot, and while others don't. Demons are usually projected in a non-human animal form, but they are not limited to an animal form necessarily. The form or forms a daemon takes, and the relationship between those forms and the daemon's person is another important topic, but we'll be covering that in its own separate section. But we want to step a little bit back and talk about the history of the community, because we're community historians and that's kind of our big jam. As we've mentioned before, the dæmon community got its inspiration from the series His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman. The first novel of the series, The Northern Lights, was published in 1995, though the book's title was changed to The Golden Compass in the United States, Canada, and several other countries, so if the book sounds familiar, but you've never heard it called The Northern Lights, that's why. Or if you're like, what's the Golden Compass? That's why. Since then, Pullman has published several more novels and even short stories based in this universe. Not only that, but parts of the series have been adapted into a television series spanning 3 seasons, a stage play, a radio play, and 1 full-length live-action film. As for the community itself, the online dæmon community began with the website called the Dæmon page, which is not exactly the same website as the modern one, different layout, different web address, etc., but it was a precursor to the modern day website. The old website was created in 2003. Also in 2003, a LiveJournal community was created, and then a year later, a forum, though again, but this forum is not the same forum that there is today. This first forum was actually created through pro boards. But after that, the community would get a large step forward with the creation of the Dæmon page and the Dæmon forum as they exist today, both of which date back to 2006. Since their creation, the Dæmon page and the Dæmon forum have and the Dæmon forum, there we go, have existed as a sort of community hub. Various other Dæmon-focused websites, forums, blogs, and more have existed over the years since then. Several versions of the Dæmon forum have even been created for non-English speakers. A thing of interest to note is that there actually is an academic paper that focuses on the Dæmon community. The paper is in Polish, and the title of the series, the title of the article roughly translates into English as Dæmonism, that is, to get to know yourself, the phenomenon of Dæmonism in the Polish internet, and the Dæmon concept in Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials trilogy. We're going to refrain from trying to pronounce the article's true title to spare everyone's ears of us trying and failing to speak a lick of Polish. It would not be pretty if we tried. The article focuses on the Polish Dæmon community and includes a wide variety of information regarding both the Dæmon community in general and the Polish Dæmon forum specifically. If you are interested in learning more about the history of the Dæmon community, one place to learn more about it is our document, A Timeline of the Dæmon Community, which can be found on our website, the Chimeras Library. Was that kind of a shameless plug? Yeah, it kind of was. Now to talk about forms. When dæmians talk about their daemons' forms, they are referring to the shape their daemons take. Given a daemon is part of the dæmian's mind, their form is truly only limited as far as their own imagination and desire. Unlike the daemons of his Dark Materials, real-life demons need not be bound to any specific form, or even take on forms of non-earthly creatures if they so desire. How often a daemon changes their form is totally up to the daemon-dæmian pair. While daemons can take on any form, within the community, special interest is given to forms that individuals can describe as their settled forms. Within the community, the word settle, as in settle or settling, refers to a state where a person's sense of their own personality and their own awareness of who they are as a person stabilizes or doesn't change as radically as it did when they were younger. Someone who still feels that they are still changing a lot, or they feel like they don't really know who they are as a person just yet, is described as being unsettled in the community. The exact nature of what counts as being settled is still a little bit up for debate within the community, because personal growth and life experiences are a lot less confined and defined as they are in the fictional world of Philip Pullman. But the general idea is that it's a kind of form that fits the general nature of a person is still used within the community. However, unlike the fictional series, even well into adulthood, a person's settled form can potentially change depending on life experiences. So within the community, it is accepted that a person's settled form can still possibly change over time. That being said, within the daemon concept, many daemians tend to seek out and find forms that reflect them as an individual in some manner. While far from a requirement, it is common for daemons to use one of the personality typing systems forged within the community over the years to find forms that reflect their personality. When a form that fits a daemian's personality is found, it is common for this form to be referred to as a settled form, a term that is taken from the His Dark Materials series. How often a daemon takes this form varies. Some daemians have a daemon who always or almost always uses the form that they feel reflects the daemon. Other times, many have a daemon who never uses a settled form, and instead sticks to forms that they find more fun or comforting. There is no set way that a daemon must exist as far as forms they take. It all boils down to personal preference. I'm going to take a swift break to take a drink. Okay. So the act of searching for what forms best fit a person's personality and sense of self is called form finding. Over the years, the community has created several different form finding styles. Within each style, there is a different methodology to how an animal is compared to a person's personality, interest, etc. The form finding systems that currently exist in the community include the analytic form, a form that is derived by taking the real behaviors of animals and interpreting them into personality traits. The method is not about literal comparisons. For example, it is not about a nocturnal animal fitting with someone that likes being awake at night. It is more about the reasons behind those behaviors of those animals. For example, it would be closer to say that if a given animal is nocturnal because they try to avoid predators, such a trait could be interpreted as someone who prefers to avoid attention. This is an older style of form finding within the community. Because this method is based on real and observable behaviors that can be researched, mythical beasts and a large number of extinct animals are not considered viable forms within this analytic method. Another popular method is the Pullman form. This is also sometimes called the symbolic form. This is a form derived from cultural beliefs, common associations, and symbolism regarding an animal, and comparing that to the daemon's interest, talents, goals in life, roles in society, or similar. For example, one aspect of an owl form would be an interest in or career in knowledge and wisdom. How to handle clashing associations across different cultures is a little debated within the community, but it's generally regarded the idea that you go with what your own cultural association is, where applicable. This form finding system is a little newer and is inspired by, if a lot more detailed, to how Philip Pullman uses to find forms for his characters' demons in the series. As this method is based on beliefs and cultural associations, mythical beasts, extinct animals, and more are a lot more potentially viable forms within the Pullman form method. Have a quick drink. Finally, there is personal form. This is a form that has a deep and important meaning to the dæmian. As this type of settled form is far more based on personal rationality and consideration, there's no really set methodology to this form finding style. It varies widely from person to person. Other types of forms that aren't strictly about form finding include the comfort form, a form that a dæmian finds comfort in having around. And then there is the aspirational form, a form that describes a person who a dæmian aspires to become. One way to think about these form finding styles is to consider them close to a sort of like the personality typing system, akin to the Enneagram or the Myers-Briggs type indicator, also sometimes simply called BMTI. They are a means of categorizing key personality traits down to the components that can be shared and described to others. Regardless of what form system is used, the idea is to find a well-fitting form that describes a person as a whole, or as close to a whole as reasonably possible. A form only fitting one or two traits with a person isn't enough to be really considered a well-fitting form. What style of form finding a person uses or doesn't is totally personal. Some people only care about one form finding style or another, while some people search for forms using more than one method. To reiterate, a dæmon doesn't have to take on a settled form, even once one is found. If they do or they do not, and why, is completely unique for every dæmon-dæmian pair. Now, within the community, resources exist where someone can take a specific species of one animal and have done research to investigate how that animal can be interpreted through a form finding style. A whole subforum on the dæmon form is dedicated to people sharing these write-ups. For the analytic form style, a complete and in-depth written down interpretation of an animal's particular traits and behaviors translated into personality characteristics is called an analysis, while a brief summary of the same is called a vibe. For the Pullman form style, a complete and in-depth written down interpretation of a particular animal's cultural symbolism translated into life narratives and roles is called a portrait, while a brief summary of the same is called a sketch. These write-ups can be particularly useful for either those trying to find out exactly how these different form-finding styles operate, Exactly. Or they can help people who are having trouble analyzing or portraying a specific animal that they're looking into to see if it fits in a settled form or not. Need to drink again. Okay, so that was a lot about how having a daemon can work, but why have a daemon at all? Well, to begin, there is no set reason. There is no right or wrong reason. Every dæmian's relationship with their daemon is unique and unto their own. There are a few common reasons, though. The three big ones can best be described as reasons for introspection, companionship, and entertainment. With introspection, this can come about either from the form-finding process or the act of just interacting with one's own daemon in day-to-day life. For the former, the act of researching for forms that best fit your personality can be a time of learning about how to best describe your own personality, interests, life goals, and so on. For the latter, talking to one's own daemon in and of itself can be a chance to learn about one's own thoughts that a daemon might not always notice or question. With companionship, having a daemon can provide a personal, can provide a person with comfort either just by being there, kind of like an individual invisible stuffed animal, or can be someone to talk to about things, and someone that is about what someone is thinking and feeling at any given time. For entertainment, consider this. Have you ever heard of the phenomenon where someone imagines a creature or person or animal running alongside a car they're in? Now sometimes called run-alongs on the internet. Daemons are kind of like that, but not bound to only when you're in a car. Projecting can be something that your brain just does, and having a daemon can help entertain the dæmian wherever they go. All that said, having a daemon or having an interest in Dmonism is what you make of it and what you get from it. That goes for the entire concept, both regarding interacting with a daemon or not, or looking into form finding or not. That concludes the lecture part of this panel. So now we want to turn this to an open discussion and the Q&A portion. Feel free to ask us any questions you have regarding the concept of daemons, or share your own thoughts about the concept. As far as open discussion, feel free in the chat to talk about what your own personal experience about having a daemon is. What does having a daemon mean to you? What are your daemon's forms? Or if you're not someone that has a daemon, what are your thoughts on Dmonism? And what form do you think your daemon would take? Okay, so we're going to switch gears and see. Do you have any advice on finding a daemon as an individual in the system? What's the difference between form finding a daemon and forming a new headmate? That can vary. For our system, it was relatively easy because we're a system that has such clear distinction between individuals within our system, whereas in our system, daemons are very tied in with another person in the system. They're not distinct and unto their own. So for us, it was never a potential problem, but we've heard of other systems where there is a lot more ambiguity between a daemon and another headmate in their system. And unfortunately, there's no real clear way of making that distinction, especially for people where their daemons kind of slide into very similar to what a tulpa is. Chimeras, what does Dmonism mean for those of you that practice it? For us, we got into Dmonism before we were actually fully aware and accepting that we were plural. So for us, even though only a few of us in our system actually have a daemon and interact with a daemon to some degree or another. Dæmonism holds a very special place in our heart because being around people who were accepting of one kind of idea of not being alone in your head allowed us a space to kind of become accepting of plurality in a larger sense. So our daemons are kind of somewhere between entertainment, not so much like personal introspection anymore, though that definitely was the case while we were trying to figure out our own individuality. But yeah, so that's kind of what our daemons mean to us to this day. Let's see. Oh no, there's so many questions. If I were interested in getting into the dæmon community, where would I start? Probably the best place to go, because there's a couple of smaller forums, there's a couple of blogs on like Tumblr, etc. But probably the best place to go would be the dæmon page / the dæmon forum. On there, even if you're not really interested in the forum itself, they have lots of links to various other smaller websites. There is a Discord for the dæmon community. I think there's one, if not more. So that's probably the best place to start, and then kind of be able to branch out from there. Another question is, how do you tell if you have a dæmon? I'm plural, and I consider all of my headmates as a family. I wouldn't be surprised if I already have a dæmon somehow, given my experience. Again, it can vary from system for system. From system to system. For us, it was fairly easy to distinguish once we kind of got a vibe for the distinctions between a headmate and a dæmon. Though early on, when we were still figuring out our plurality, there were a couple of people that we thought were dæmons for people, and then they just discovered they weren't. And then there were also cases where we thought someone was a headmate, and then realized, wait, that is someone's dæmon. So it can be very ambiguous, and there's no real right or wrong clear way of describing it. Though usually a dæmon is more of an entity that is created or just kind of forms, rather than it just happens to always exist. At least in a general sense. Spook Dog, what is the difference between dæmons and a medium system? Since a medium system is a very wide category between singlet and multiple, sometimes it may be a little bit controversial to some dæmians, but sometimes we kind of feel like being a dæmian kind of slides into somewhat of a median-esque experience. Definitely closer to singlet than anything, but it's still like kind of a median-esque experience. I guess the distinction would be that with daemons, the existence of a demon is very similar to the daemons of historic materials. So there's a little bit more of a structure, narrowed down experience of how a daemon functions, if that makes sense. Are forms types mandatory for daemons? Not at all. Some people have very little interest in form finding or finding a settled form, and for some people that's the only thing that they really care about when it comes to dæmonism. For our system, our daemons kind of are basically only take on their settled forms, but that is far from the case across the board. We know some people in the community are like, their daemons never take on a settled form, or they don't really highly look for a settled form. They're just like whatever animal their daemon or they want them to be at any given time. Let's see. Kat asks, I think being a Theron and having a daemon would feel weird. I am a cougar, but that probably doesn't match my human personality. It's like there are 2+ animals that represent your soul. Can you speak on this feeling? The best way to describe the distinction is having a stereotype is what you are, whereas a daemon is more of a symbolic representation of personality traits. So neither the theotype or the daemon's form have to be correlated in any way. For like a personal example in our system, Ocean Watcher is a frilled shark theron, but one of his daemon's forms is a sea snake. There's because his personality is his identity as an animal is one shape, an animal, but as far as his daemons, part of what his personality traits are completely different. So it can be a little bit ambiguous, but there is some distinction there. I feel bad because it's hard for me to keep an eye on the other chat while I'm trying to answer questions. I'll have so much fun reading through everyone's comments on the other chat. Let's see. Question. Would you recommend to someone who knows all the technical stuff about Dæmonism and has a feel for it for a long time, but their brain just really isn't really taking any of it? Giving up changes, techniques entirely, just trying to keep brute force on it. If I understand what your question is, sometimes people's brains just don't really take to Dæmonism, and that's okay. Some people are just like, it's an interesting concept, but they really have either their brain just doesn't really grasp the idea of separating a portion of their internal dialogue into another entity, or creating an imaginary friend to interact within a daemon's role. Other people, they're just not very interested in trying to find a form that represents their personality. Sorry if that's not really answering the question. Sometimes it's hard for us to infer a good answer to a question. Oh no, there's so many more questions. We're a slow talker and a slow reader. I apologize. Sorry if this is already mentioned, but are daemons something that you can kind of just discover, or do you have to think about it consciously for them to exist? Either or. The daemon community is kind of started out as people who heard about kind of the idea and thought that would be cool, and then they started talking to, their brain just naturally said, this is an entity that is like a daemon, and they went from there. Where other people, they discovered the concept and they're like, that sounds cool, and then they created their daemon. For us, we kind of go either way. For example, Earth Listener just vaguely heard of the topic being mentioned on a Theron forum one day, and then suddenly, dog. So it can run the gamut on how someone ends up with a daemon. We've also heard of people where they had an imaginary friend for all of their childhood, and then they kind of heard the topic of Dæmonism, and their imaginary friend they'd had for years just kind of became their daemon, or just was their daemon in a role-like sense. Yes, the daemon, the TDF Discord is really active. Are daemons permanent once they are formed usually, or can they come and go? Can you have multiple at one time? Yes. Some people, they get into Dæmonism and then they kind of stop being as interested. They don't interact with their daemon anymore. For us, we can go months, weeks, or even a year or so in a few cases where they didn't interact with their daemon and then came back to the interest in the concept. So it can vary quite a lot. Daemons can just become inactive and then come back or whatnot. As far as how many you can have at one time, while one is kind of the traditional classic, there is no reason why someone can't have multiple daemons. In fact, we've seen people that just have multiple daemons. Minion-esque. So how similar are daemons to Flyas in Norse paganism? Because I know they are kind of similar, but are there differences? We've tried to actually look into this because we're nerds. But there's some stuff about Flyas that we're still very unfamiliar with. But the general gist is, at least like the daemon concept is it's a very mental thing, or at least traditionally Dæmonism, the daemon community considers it a mental construct, whereas if Flayas is actually how it's pronounced, it's probably not pronounced that way at all. In Norse paganism is a spiritual experience, but for people that view their daemons as being spiritual, there definitely could be a lot of overlap or a graying of experiences where it's hard to really distinguish one to the other. We have a document somewhere on our computer where we actually did a bunch of research trying to define what that entity is in Norse paganism, but it's been a couple of years since we looked at the document, so some of the details on the differences between a Flaya and a daemon is not automatically coming to mind, but we could hunt down that piece of document after this panel and throw it somewhere on the forum, somewhere on this Discord, so if anyone's interested in it. How do you figure out your daemon from your personality type? I'm not sure what you're referring to exactly. I'm sorry. What would be the difference between a daemon and a tulpa with a human form? Interestingly, when the tulpa community was first starting out, there were actually people that kind of joined the daemon forum, and this was kind of something that was brought up. And the general gist is that there's no hard definition that distinguishes the two. A tulpa that has an animal form that has a role to their host that is similar to a daemon, it could be basically indistinguishable between the two. And plus, we've heard of people that are interested in Dæmonism who actually use some of the practices in tulpamancy to create a more fleshed out daemon. So really, the difference is kind of wherever it feels, whatever feels more applicable. If it feels more applicable to call the entity in your head a daemon, or it feels more applicable to call the entity in your head a tulpa. Which works is very up to what you think fits best personally. So like the daemon represents an externalization of the host. Literally is the only requirement. As far as we're aware, that's kind of the best way to describe a daemon. It's a mental construct. It's kind of like a daemon, the daemons from His Dark Materials, and everything else is kind of varies. Your mileage may vary on everything else regarding what a daemon is. So yeah, basically, there's no right or wrong way for a daemon to exist for someone. Can daemons randomly form originally from trying to push them away, as if they originally existed to hurt because they were unsatisfied from your mannerisms until you sat them down and chatted? We apologize, but we're not quite sure what the question is. Sorry, sometimes our reading comprehension can be pretty frazzled at times. Oh, the question from earlier, asking, what do you suggest to do when you're not seeing any results? Whether to give up or accept your brain isn't prone to something, or to keep trying. That kind of depends on what you want to do. If it's something that you want to keep trying, If you're having trouble visualizing, projecting a daemon, you could always try like looking into visualization practices to try and make that easier. We've also heard of people, especially once the tulpa community came into existence, we've heard of people that were having trouble creating the personality of their demon, taking some practices from the tulpa community and kind of using them to help create their daemon. How much that helps or not, we're not sure, because we're not sure what you've tried before. I know there's still so many questions. I'm wondering how much community history and context actually might be very helpful to particularizing these differences. For example, Dæmonism comes specifically out of the internet culture that formed around Pullman's books. How important do you think the community and historical context is important to distinguish Dæmonism from things like tulpas and median systems? There is definitely a distinction between the daemon community and the plural community, or at least the plural community within the past 5 or so years. The plural community as it exists within the past number of years has definitely kind of broadened and started touching bases with a lot more aspects that have similar experiences to plurality, but previously was not necessarily described as plurality. As far as the distinction between the daemon community and the tulpa community, there is definitely a distinction, but also people were coming on to the Dæmon forum nearly around the same time that the tulpa community was being created, having, saying, hey, I have similar experiences, and it's called, I'm interested, and we're calling them tulpas. And then we saw people that were dæmians taking practices that were coming out of the tulpa community and using them to help better create their daemons. But there is a distinction. Most of it is terminology based. Like in the daemon community, it's called projecting, and in the tulpa community, when you visualize your tulpa in the external world, there's a different term, and I'm blanking on what that term is. But the actual experience is kind of the same. It's just very distinct terminology differences. Yay, Poppy, who has a far more information on play when it comes to like information, because we were blanking on any distinct stuff. So thank you. Awesome. Oh no, there's still so many people have replied. And we still have 20 minutes. So hopefully we're not boring people. Let's see. Do you view Dæmonism as a kind of fiction identity? Not really. While Dæmonism definitely takes a lot of inspiration from Philip Pullman's Dæmons, there's definitely a lot of differences between the two. It was more the interaction between Dæmonism and the Philip Pullman series is a lot more just strictly it inspired the concept more than anything. Though that doesn't mean that necessarily any given person might feel that having a daemon kind of makes them closer to having a fiction identity. But as a whole, I would say it's not. Outside of people where the answer is yes. Someone put an official TDF Discord server in link to that in the announcement and advertisements. Cool. So anyone that's interested in a Discord server about daemons, check the advertisements. Could different members in a system have different daemons? Totally, completely. Everyone in our system who does have a daemon has a very distinctly different daemon. The 4 people in our system that have an active daemon at this time, those 4 people, their daemons have different names, genders, settled forms, personalities, etc. And they're very distinct from one another, and even as far as like their internal voices in our head. I hope everyone has enjoyed this panel. I think we're starting to finally get caught up to some of the questions. Can daemons show up with a settled form? Does one's body age have anything to do with it? Can that happen for when one is considered young? As far as like a daemon happening to show up in a settled form, that could vary. Most before the symbolic / Pullman form was created, it could have been a lot harder because of how specific and distinct the methodology with analytic forms is. But as far as like personal forms and the symbolic Pullman form, it's a lot more possible. Though it's probably close. It would be probably closer to just chance more than anything. Though we say that, but Earth Listener's daemon, Dante Barrows, showed up as a black dog, and we thought that was that's just a form that he likes to take. And then it turns out that Earth Listener's Pullman form for her daemon was a hovor, which is basically can be a breed of large black dogs. So we're like, oh, that fit. But usually that is not necessarily the case, but it could happen. And as far as age, there's some debate on when a person settles. The general gist is usually late teens, early adulthood. But of course that can vary depending on life experiences, etc., etc. Oh no, where are we? I have one person ask, I have voices in my head that aren't connected to altars. Sometimes we banter, and they usually provide feedback for myself. Could that be connected to Dæmonism? Yes. Yes, possibly. Especially because within the Dæmon community, a lot of people consider the other half of their internal dialogue, kind of that back and forth banter within your own head, your own mind, that other side of that banter being your daemon, or distinguishing that as a daemon. So potentially, yes. Asterisk, not a certainty kind of thing. Can daemons possess like a tulpa can? We have heard of daemons where that is the case. For us personally, that's not possible based on how fronting mechanics works in our system. But yes, we have heard of daemons who their daemons can front or possess to some extent or another. If that's possible and to what extent varies widely. But yes, we have heard that is to some varying extents possible. We feel bad for kind of hyper focusing on the panel questions, but we're hyper interested in reading everyone's comments in the other chat. Okay, I think we're caught up on the questions for the chat for a second, so we're going to jump over and say hi to see what everyone's saying in the channel chat, and also get a drink because our voice is getting sore. You know you don't talk much when talking for like 40 minutes straight, your voice starts going out. Oops. Let's see. Oh no, anyone that's helping us answer these questions is amazing because we're probably not the greatest at answering some of these questions. We don't know everything. We decided that we wanted to do a panel on Dæmonism, but we are far from an expert on the topic. So people that have input, thank you very much. And for anyone where they still don't feel like either people in the channels are answering a question very well, or we personally, us talking here is not answering it very well, we encourage you to check out the TDF, the Dmon server that's on the advertisements. Check out the Dmon page because they have lots of good information on just the resource website itself, or consider joining the Dmon forum and looking around there. Or even if you don't want to join the forum proper, there's lots of the forum that is publicly accessible and viewable without making an account. So those could also be very useful resources if there's questions that you still have and that hasn't been answered very well here. Also, we're down to like 7 minutes, and we don't want to and there's going to be a panel right after this, so probably we're going to cut this off about 5 minutes till so that there's plenty of time for people to jump over and not take up any space for that upcoming event. So we probably have about 3 minutes left if anyone has any last minute questions, comments, etc. While saying that, we do want to say that we help that words. Our brain's like, no more words for the day. We hope that everyone really had a good time listening to this. We hope that we didn't sound awful, or we didn't sound like we had no clue what we were doing. Again, this panel is being recorded, so if you didn't get to hear all of it, it will be posted on the OtherCon OtherCon YouTube channel, and we'll also be linking it in the future on our personal website, along with a link to our script and along with our slides. So all these things will still be accessible after this convention. So we hope everyone had a good time and people liked us bantering and trying to talk about some stuff that we find personally interesting. Oh, there's one last minute question. Can you give your demon kisses on your snoot? Yes, Paige, we can and we will. We love you too, loves. You're gay.